Mother Knows Death presents External Exams with Nicole and Jemmy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mother Knows Death. On this week's external exam, we will be speaking with Paul Koudounaris, who has a PhD in art history from the University of California and has written widely on European ossuaries and charnel houses for both academic and popular journals. He is the author of The Empire of Death, A Cultural History of Ossuaries and Charnel Houses, Memento Mori, The Dead Among Us, Heavenly Bodies, Cult Treasures, and Spectacular Stains from the Catacombs, and a book about domestic felines called A Cat's Tale that was also a Barnes & Noble's Book of the Year. Paul is one of my great friends, and today I will be talking to him about his new book called Faithful Unto Death, Pets, Cemeteries, Animal Graves, and Eternal Devotion. This book is available in the UK on September 16th and in the USA on October 1st. Hi, Paul. Welcome to Mother Knows Death.
Hi, Mom. How are you, Nicole?
How are you? I haven't seen you in a couple months in person, but we do talk on the phone almost every single day, which is interesting. But let's get started talking about your new book. I'm so excited for this. I have my own copy right behind me. It's called Faithful Unto Death. Can you tell us a little bit about what the book's about?
Well, it's about the history of pet cemeteries and animal burials. And it focuses on, everyone's got this kind of idea that we've had this relationship with animals as this, keeping them as pets since the ancient world. And it's really not true. I mean, humans have always lived with animals, but pets as we know them are really invented in the 19th century. The way we live with them and treat them as family, the way we feed them, everything about the way we react with them comes from the 19th century, from the Industrial Revolution, when people were moving into the big cities and taking these animals into their homes and in small domestic environments and bonding with them emotionally. Yet they were not allowed to have a dignified death, even though they had become members of the family. It's like normally when you got rid of an animal in the 19th century, you'd take it to a rending plant and they would just kind of, chop it up and burn it down into fertilizer or for industrial purposes like glue, or, you'd toss it in the river. And it was emotionally, obviously, very taxing for anyone who cares about their animals. And so this book is kind of the story about how some very rebellious people in the 19th century decided to put their foot down and say, no, we love these animals. They are family members. We're not going to mistreat them at their death. We're going to give them a death with dignity that they deserve, just like any human family member.
This book is kind of different. I don't think that there's really anything like it out there, right?
No, there isn't. And that's part of it. I mean, part of the masochistic nature of my personality is that I like to do projects that no one has done before. And when I first started looking into this, I was like, what about pet cemeteries? And I started taking pictures in them, and they were really touching and really beautiful. And it's like, has anyone ever done a book about this? And it's like, actually, no, I guess it falls on me.
The cool thing about this book is you wrote it, but also you took all the photos in it. How do you come across all of these pet cemeteries?
Well, because this took me 11 years, that's why. In the process of doing this book, I had an entire another book in the middle of it that I researched, wrote, photographed, and even that book is now 4 years old. I've been working on this a really long time. I've traveled across the world. I've gone and taken photographs of pet cemeteries in Indonesia, in Bolivia. I've gone all the way down to New Zealand in order to photograph animals' graves. And so it's just a matter of time.
Do people contact you and say, hey, I'm just curious of the process, like how you find them. Because I don't think, with the exception of just seeing one in a friend's backyard once in a while, I've never come across one that was dedicated to a pet, but it's really interesting.
Well, they're around, and it's just a matter of research. Yeah, I do have people contact me. Maybe I have too many people contact me because it's like the book is already done, and I'll get messages from people. It's like, hey, just so you know, there's a little pet cemetery right off the road in Pensacola, Florida. It's like, on the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're around. It's just a matter of research and looking them up. They really are everywhere. And especially in the United States, this is a really American story. There are more pet cemeteries in the United States than the rest of the world combined. And there's a staggering array of them. in Alabama, there's a pet cemetery just for coon dogs, and you can't just claim your dog as a raccoon hunting hound. You have to get like notarized documents from people who have hunted with your dog to show that it's a first-rate coon dog. We have an amazing array of pet cemeteries in the United States.
When you came to Philly, did you go to the University of Penn Museum, the archaeology museum?
I did. I've been there with Adam.
So one cool thing that I always thought, even since I was a little kid, is that they have mummified cats, or like
Yes.
their pets,
Yes.
and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's there's a little bit of a misconception about the mummified cats in Egypt. I mean, because people will say to me about Bubastis, which is the city of cats, and I've been to Bubastis, that it's like, well, isn't that like a pet cemetery? Because they'd mummify the cats. And it's fascinating, but the answer is no, because a lot of those cats, most of those cats, if you x-ray them, you can see that, first of all, they were very young. Most of them were not of a mature age, meaning that they were sacrificed. And you can see, like cut marks or, on the body or places where they've broken their neck. Because back in Egypt, yes, they did love their cats. They did love their animals. People would be mummified with favorite animals and have those animals placed in the tomb, which is really touching. But the vast, vast majority of those mummified animals were actually raised by temples to be sacrificed to gods.
That's really interesting. I never knew that. So I have this website, The Gross Room, and
Yeah.
oftentimes I'll write stories because animals do have such a close connection with people, and sometimes it has to do with horrible accidents involving animals where an animal gets killed. Or I even showed one example of a forensic case where they used a dog that was killed to help do ballistics for the human that was killed at the scene as well. And some of the feedback that I get from Gross Room members is like, please do not ever talk about dead animals. I could look at dead animals and dead humans all day long, but my heart breaks too much for any dead animals. So do you think that this book is still good for people that get really upset when you're talking about animals dying?
Well, first of all, let me say that I understand that because I get similar feedback. Because for years now, I've been picking up roadkill animals and making roadside funerals for them. And it's ironic because when I put those online, they're, first of all, the most popular category of posts that I do. And they've also lost me more followers online than any other kind of post that I do because some people just can't take it. The idea that this animal has died and it's sitting there on the road dead, even though you're trying to do something beautiful and pay tribute to it, it is painful. The death of an animal is a different kind of pain than the death of a human because we have a different relationship to them. It's an intimate, nonverbal relationship to them. And when they die, it just feels like the death of something very innocent. And it can be very hard to take. Regarding this book, there's no gore in it. This book is all pictures of graves, and it's all stories of how people who love their animals have looked for ways to pay tribute for them. So I think it's actually a perfect book for these people. Of course, it talks about dead animals, but there's nothing gory about it. And the whole book is really, it's a tribute to love.
Speaking of Instagram, do you ever get like shit or get censored if you post these photos of dead animals? Because I know for sure I do with the humans. So, are they as sensitive with the rules of that? Because I'm sure people report it because it upsets them.
No, what I get, and this is the strangest thing that Meta as a platform has ever started doing. I get passive aggressive messages from the platform. And what I'll get is I'll put up something because I guess they have these bots. And I've probably had enough people complain. It's like, oh my God, there's a dead cat by the side of the road, even though it is wrapped in a funeral shroud. And, it's like covered in flowers and it's this loving tribute. I've got enough complaints about it. And I guess their bots are analyzing me and like watching me for this stuff. And what I'll get is whenever I put up those photos, I get an instant pop-up that says, we're not going to remove your photo because it does not violate our rules, but we strongly recommend that you remove it on your own, or we're not going to let any non-followers see your posts. And, click accept or reject, and I'll just reject it. And these are the messages that I get. I don't know anyone else who gets these passive aggressive messages. It's weird. they're asking me to censor myself. And I'll always just say, go to hell. I mean, this isn't about Meta, and it's not about my followers. It's not about me. It's about paying tribute to this fallen animal who deserves some one last memorial in this world. And the funny thing about that is I had one of them recently. It was these 2 dead dogs that had been dumped out in the desert and left for dead. And I made this roadside tribute to them, wrapped them up in funeral shrouds. And I got that message from Instagram saying, please self-censor yourself and remove this. I said no. And then a week later, I got a message from Meta about that post, another pop-up message and say, hey, that post of yours reached 100% more accounts than any other post that you've posted in the last year. Good going. Do it again.
Oh,
something
my
like that.
God.
So they're telling, so they were telling me to censor myself or I could be in trouble. And then they're telling me it's like, yeah, dead dogs. Good. Find some more.
I can't even get started on all of the. I get that message too. So I know you said that you don't know anyone that gets it, but like I get the same one too. It's
you get the passive aggressive message.
Yeah, on every single one. I have a whole entire section of the Instagram to go into, and it's basically like, we're not showing your account to non-followers until you delete these posts, but we're not going to make you delete them because you're not violating any terms. It's so insane. It's like this weird bullying tactic or something.
Yeah, it's a passive aggressive.
Yeah, I can't stand it. So, all right. So speaking of this, so you're saying that this book is good for people that might get upset about it because it's telling these stories of how animal owners were attributing to these animals in their death. Were there any that you had a connection with that either upset you or made you feel happy? Well, because you've been writing this for so long and came across so many different cases.
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, the hardest thing about this book, one of the reasons it took so long, was because imagine waking up every day and going to work and reliving the grief of someone losing their animal, because that's what I had to do. I had to go through all these stories about, the death of people's pets, and it was psychologically very debilitating. One of my, I don't know, maybe it's my favorite story. It's the one I think that touched me the most. Was about a dog in Montana by the name of Shep. And Shep's story is special. There's this trope about dogs mourn their owners after their owners die. And it's not just a trope because it's also a real thing. It kind of started as a literary trope, but then when people started looking, the dogs were doing it. The most famous one is that dog in Japan, Hachi or Hachiko, the one who waited at the train station for his owner who never came back for many years. This is a similar story. It's about a dog waiting at a train station for an owner who will never come back, but it has a couple twists to it that made it, I think, really emotionally powerful. First of all, it was set against the American Depression, and it was set in the West because it was in Montana. So it's kind of got this Wild West background, like the Wild West railroads. And it's in the Depression. So, like this idea of these humans who are really suffering too. And at the same time, no one ever knew who his owner was. And so that's something I found really touching. A dog who refuses to forget a person that the rest of humanity has forgotten because they never knew the owner's name. They found him dead. They sent him on a train headed east. They didn't know who he was. The dog tried to get on the train and they blocked the dog. And he said, no way, you can't come on this train. Get out of here, dog. And the dog never left the station. The dog, for the rest of his life, stayed at that station and examined every passenger who ever came off that train to see if his owner was coming back. He was going to spend the rest of his life mourning that owner and waiting for him to return, but nobody knew who he was. And I found that so touching, It's like that the rest that, it's the Depression and people are suffering and it's the Wild West. And all of humanity has forgotten the identity of this man, but this dog remembers. This dog is the last witness and the last testimony to this man. And I found that really touching also because, this dog had become very famous for waiting at the train station. And there were all these, like Ripley's Believe It or Not wrote him up. He was in all these newspapers, this emotionally touching story of this dog who refuses to forget this guy. And so people started to donate money for him. And, it's like, hey, here's some money for that dog. We're sending some money for the dog. And of course, the dog doesn't want, it has nothing to do with his money, And so in the end, they had so much money because the train station guys were feeding him. He didn't need more than food. And so in the end, they wound up with so much money that they started what they called the Shep Fund. And all the money went to the Montana School of Deaf and Blind to buy those kids at the school Christmas presents. So these were orphaned deaf and blind kids. And the only reason they had Christmas was because this dog loved this man so much and people were donating money for this dog. And it starts to feel like a feel-good story too, but it's not. And that's the other reason it was emotionally powerful to me, because it's such a tragic story. Because, you start to think it's like, well, this dog had so many friends, people love this dog. It's like, but every day for this dog, every single day with every train was a new heartbreak, because that dog wanted one thing and he expected that man to be on that train every day. And every day that man was not there. So every day this dog's heart breaks again. But that dog never gives up hope. Like every night, that dog goes to bed brokenhearted again. Every morning, that dog wakes up with new hope that maybe that man's coming back. And I just found there are so many angles to that I thought made it emotionally such a powerful story.
Yeah, and and that's why I do want to encourage people that might get sad talking about dead animals, because this is like such a good story, and it just makes you think of the connection that you have with your pet. And like it's even, you go on vacation or you leave for a couple weeks or months, this because you travel a lot, and you have
Yeah.
someone else taking care of your animal, but ultimately they always want you and they're happy when you're home, even though they're getting fed and
Yeah.
taken care of.
Yeah, but whenever I get home, my cats make a point of paying no attention to me for one day.
Oh yeah,
It's
because
like,
they're
"Oh,
mad
you're
at you,
back."
right?
Yeah. They're like, "Oh, you're back," as if we care.
Yeah.
And then the next day, it's okay. There are a lot of books about grieving lost pets. I wouldn't recommend a single one of them. Trust me, I read every single one of them while I was preparing to write this book. Part of what I wanted to do with this book was approach that topic, but not as a therapist, not tell people what to do or how to grieve or how to mourn. Just show them examples of how other people have grieved and mourned. And I think that itself is kind of healing, because it lets you know the grief that you're feeling is justified and it's normal. And it lets you know there are a whole variety of ways you can pay a fitting respect to your pet.
So you're obviously an animal lover, in particular
Yeah.
cats. You're a cat dad. What has preparing and writing this book changed how you feel about how you would possibly tribute to them after they pass on?
Probably not, because I was already a guy who had buried a cat in his backyard. This is before I started the book, and when I moved, dug the cat up and took it with me and wound up making a reliquary for it. So I think I've always kind of been of the mindset that they should get a fitting tribute. And in the end, I didn't even abandon the one that was buried at my last house. Um, so no, I don't think it's changing anything for me. I do hear from a lot of people when I tell them that story, though. It's like, I wish I had done the same thing. I wish I had taken my pet with me, because now it's stuck in some stranger's yard because I moved.
Yeah, and that's something that I was going to ask you. I know every single person that I know that has had a pet that's passed, they either bury it in the yard, like you said, or they get it cremated and they have their ashes in an
Yeah.
urn in their house. Have you, when you were doing the research for this book and anything, did you come across any unconventional ways that people were, or what they were doing with the pet's body after they
Yeah.
died?
Yeah. Well, the obvious one to talk about, which I don't get into in the book because it's really a tangent, is cloning. Because that's actually an entire industry now, cloning your pet. It's all done in Korea, or at least all the big labs that clone pets were in Korea. I don't know if there are some labs in China now that are doing it. There might be, but it's a Korean thing. They started it. It's interesting because, well, first, personally, I don't like it. As much as I love my particular cats, I would never clone them, just because it's like you'd be bringing in this new animal as a baby that's cloned from the old animal. And I think there would be too much of a tendency to expect the new animal to act like the old one. It's like, well, wait a minute, you're the clone of Fluffy. Why did you just piss on the carpet? Fluffy never did that. I would not want to create that pressure that they should be exactly the same. When I first started on this research, I actually had looked into the animal cloning, as maybe that's something I should include in this book. And I had contacted some of the labs in Korea, and they were very welcoming. And they were like, yes, if you want to come out and talk about the cloning and visit our lab and see what we're doing, we'd love to host you. Please come out. I was just in Korea a few weeks ago. I had a full day in Seoul on a stopover to Indonesia. And I tried to contact the labs and said, hey, do you remember a few years back we talked about the animal cloning and you invited me out? Nobody will talk to me anymore about the cloning. I think they've gotten such negative press, and there have been some scandals around the cloning that I think they've just kind of blocked themselves off to outsiders. There have been some accusations that they're not actually cloning the animals. Like on their websites, they give you instructions on how to get the DNA after your pet has died. And it's almost about the same as like getting a stool sample or something. You're just sticking a thing in, I guess, and scooping out some genetic material and mailing it to them in Korea. There have been accusations against at least one of the labs that they're not actually cloning the animals. They're just looking at a picture of your cat or dog. You're laughing already. You know where I'm going with this.
Oh
yeah, they're just going out and like, okay, well, that one looks just like it and it's a kitten. Just get this one and mail it to Cleveland and tell them the guy it's the clone. So, and I don't know that that's true. I mean, it's just accusations that have been made. But yeah, that's really on like the outer realm of the pet memorializing is the cloning. I have seen videos. I have to give the caveat that these are videos that usually the companies themselves are making. So you can decide, maybe they have a vested interest, but they're interviews with people who have had their animals cloned and they're very happy with it. And they'll tell you things like, oh my God, we got the new dog and it came in and sat down in the exact same place in the house as the old dog. So it's obviously a clone because it has his built-in memory or something. I don't know, but that's the outer fringe. To me is the cloning.
Yeah, that's so outrageous. I imagine that it's a huge business money-wise, and it probably costs so much money to even get something. Like I'm going to look into this more when we get off here.
Yeah.
I'm
animal
like really
cloning
interested.
in Korea.
Yeah,
Animal cloning in Korea. I don't think it's being done in North America at all. There is cloning in Canada. Have you ever heard of the Raelians?
No.
They're in Quebec. It's okay. So Raelians, and it's a UFO cult. But they all kind of look like members of Styx, but wearing white robes, and they're in Canada. And it was founded by this guy who used to be a Formula One race car driver. And he's got this whole cosmology, but they're into the cloning. And they were the proponents of cloning, the Raelians, in North America for a long time. Like I've been to seminars in Los Angeles that the Raelians have done about the ethics of cloning and the technology of cloning. And they claim that they have successfully been cloning animals and other things. But once again, I have no idea what goes on with the Raelians for real. But they're the only ones I know of in North America that apparently have a developed process for cloning animals.
It's actually a very weird thing that people would want to do that because you're physically just getting an animal that has, I mean, really, it's no different than getting the animal off the street that looks like the other animal, because I imagine with animals, it's the same as humans that are animals, that your entire personality is based upon, I mean, some of it is genetic and some of it is...
It's based upon conditioning.
Yeah.
Personality, I think.
So all your life experiences, it's the same with the animal. Like maybe when I adopted my cat, she was already like 7 months old, but she lived in the streets of West Philly. So like that kind of formed her early personality. She wouldn't be the same if I got her as a brand new kitten.
Right. Well, I think it also depends if you're a person who believes that there's a certain inherited memory. Like if you really believe that there is inherited memory that will come with the cloning, maybe that makes it more attractive to you because you believe that, this animal you're getting back already has inherited, the memory or the behavioral tendencies of the original animal. On a spiritual level, of course, it's whacked out because, then you get, if you're a spiritual person, I don't see how you can possibly be okay with the cloning. Because if you're a spiritual person, then there are some really troubling questions about, creating, man creating life rather than life being divine. If there's a soul, will the soul inhabit? Will the soul deign to come back and inhabit the clone? And if not, what do you have? You basically have a robot.
This episode is brought to you by StinkBalm.
This product, StinkBalm, is awesome for medical students who are taking gross anatomy because the smell of gross anatomy is terrible. And it's not like gangrene smell. It's more like weird embalming chemical smell, but it's very, very strong. And working in the hospital, being a nurse especially, you just smell people and all of their nasty fluids and cheese coming out of their in between their skin folds and everything like that. So this product is really awesome. This is my particular favorite right now. I'm holding it up. It is the coffee scent. So it's really nice to just put it right underneath your nose and smell straight up coffee instead of straight up gangrene.
If you guys want to check out StinkBalm, you could go to stinkbalmodorblocker.com and you could use code MKD15 and get 15% off of all products.
Thanks, StinkBalm. Obviously, there's like levels of people's attachment to pets, and then there's normal, and then there's just like this extra, I'm going to get my pet cloned. And then there's just like, normal people or whatever. What about, have you ever come across like people demanding to get buried with their pets? Like, can a person be in a pet cemetery?
Sure they can. And it's funny because it is, okay, people can be buried in pet cemeteries. Not every pet cemetery will do it. Of course, every pet cemetery is going to govern themselves the way they want to be governed. There's not necessarily, in most jurisdictions, there's not necessarily a problem with it because human ashes are usually no longer considered like organic material. That's why you can go out, like I can go out and I can spread someone's ashes in the desert. I can't go out and take their corpse and chop it into pieces and spread it into the desert. There's a big difference when it comes to the ash. So people can be buried in pet cemeteries. The pet cemeteries who do it are not allowed to advertise it, which I don't think is any kind of moral issue. I think it's just, I think the big cemeteries, the big cemetery chains don't want the competition, because I think it would be really appealing to people to say, it's like, well, wait a minute, I don't have to pay $10,000 for a burial at Forest Lawn. I can just have my ashes put next to Fluffy in the pet cemetery. Let's do that, because it's also a much cheaper option. So they're not allowed to advertise it. Many of them do it. There's a very interesting story that the pet cemetery where this happened at, I did not include this in the book because they didn't want their name to be, it's not that what happened wasn't their fault, but they didn't want to be involved in their name to, by consequence, be somewhat besmirched. But there was this very wealthy guy, and he had commissioned actually this huge tomb sculpture of his cats. And he had 4 cats, and they had all died, and he had buried them in this pet cemetery. And then he had made provision after he died to be buried, his ashes to be cremated, and his ashes put alongside his cat so they could be together forever. And so he dies. The cats are already buried, and they get a message from the guy's sister. It's like, yeah, my brother has died. We want to bring the ashes to you so it can be interred alongside the cats. So they had a funeral for him at the pet cemetery, bury the ashes alongside the cats. And then about a year later, the pet cemetery gets a message from the guy's estate attorney, because remember, he's a rich guy, so he's got a high-powered attorney handling his estate affairs. And the attorney says, it's like, I've never heard from anyone on your end. I have the guy's ashes, and we've been waiting to bury them. How do we arrange this? Because this is, these are the terms of his will, that he's buried alongside his cats. And they told the attorney, it's like, well, we already did it. We already had a funeral for him and buried the ashes. And the attorney says, no, you didn't, because I've had the ashes all along. I'm the one who picked up the ashes from the crematory, and I've had the ashes in my possession ever since he died. And they're like, well, we had a funeral with his family and they buried the ashes. And like, those are not his ashes. I guarantee you those are not his ashes. And so you can see why the pet cemetery didn't want to be named, because it's not their fault at all. But, so they wound up they didn't know what to do.
So who was it?
No one knows. To this day, no one knows. And they wound up taking the other ashes, opening up the grave again, and putting putting the second set of ashes in with the first set of ashes and the cats. So there's 4 cats, their owner's ashes, and a complete stranger that someone picked up from the crematory, and no one knows who it is. I can imagine too, like, the cats down there, like, when they put the original set of ashes down there, I'm sure the cats are like, who the hell is this guy? Get out of our grave. You're not our person. Get out of here. So some guy's trapped down there with 4 cats.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's definitely a problem with the crematorium, and then somebody's missing their family member, I guess, which is, oh God, what a mess. All right, so speaking of, you were talking about cloning, which I think is probably the most outrageous thing you could do when a pet dies, but this is also up there. I know, so I wanted to talk to you about this place that you used to live near. When I first met you, you were living in California, and then you moved over to the desert and you were in Arizona for a while.
Yeah.
And there's a place there that practices cryonics, which is when they freeze your dead body with the intention of restoring it back to good health in the future when that technology is available. Have you ever heard of this place or know anything about it?
I visited this place. Yeah. So it's called Alcor. Alcor is one of only 2 cryonic facilities in the United States that actually stores bodies. And I was living in Tucson, and Alcor's in Scottsdale, and I visited Alcor. If you call Alcor and ask them very, very nicely and kind of pretend that you're interested in having your body frozen, they will give you a tour. They will let you in there and let you walk around. And it's very interesting. It really, in some ways, it kind of mirrors the talk about cloning, because it's really one of those like out there fringe. It's really one of those out there fringe things that has a lot of weird and ethical questions that come. So the idea is that, you've died of cancer and you're 86 years old and your body can't continue. And so they're going to freeze you and put you in this deep freeze. It's like I think it's a liquid nitrogen solution or something, like ultimate deep freeze. And they're going to freeze your body. And then at some undetermined point in the future, when and if we ever get to the point that we can cure cancer, they're going to take you out of the deep freeze, take your DNA material and basically do cloning and clone a new body and grow you your own new body as a young person, and then put the brain inside the body. And so you'll get to start again in the prime of life. And they have these big storage containers. They're giant tubes, and within each tube there are 5 sections, five little tubes within each tube. And so there are 4 tubes on the outside for full bodies, and they just plop them in. And then there's a center tube, a center column for just heads. And so, because if you can't afford full body freezing, what they'll do is they'll just chop your head off and they'll put it in the center column, which sounds really, it sounds pretty far-fetched. It's like, oh, what? Now you're just saving my head. But, it's like, if we can get to the point where we can clone an entire body and download your brain, we're probably at a point where we can do it just from the head alone rather than the body itself.
It's so, I feel like about this one, and then also the cloning, that it's just this science that they just prey on people because it's so much money. I was looking it up, as far as, because they do it with animals too, apparently.
They can, yeah, they've started doing that. When I was there, I remember they showed me a cat. So they do have some animals in there.
And it's like, okay, you could, just freezing an animal, we're not even talking about human, but just freezing an animal's brain can range anywhere from $5,000 to $32,000. And then you have to pay storage fees every month too.
Yes. Well, that's the thing, because first of all, it's a very expensive process, because think about the technology involved to permanently freeze a body and to keep it frozen for, you might have to be frozen for 500 years. But, well, seriously, how long is it going to take if we ever get to the point that, we can revive these people? It's the facility is interesting because they showed me like the workshop where they cut off the heads, and it's a Home Depot saw. It's like nothing special. It's just like a saw that someone's gone down to Home Depot and bought. So but
Listen,
They
some
have
of my best autopsy tools are from Home Depot, so
Okay, all right, fair enough. I mean, I go to Lowe's, but you can do it. Um, the most famous person who has ever been cryonically suspended, and by the way, a lot of people call this cryogenic, but I was told at the facility themselves that the proper term is cryonic. Cryogenic, technically, I guess it means freezing them on like a microscopic level. Is that correct?
yeah, they're very stingy about the terminology between the both of
Okay.
them, and they want to
Yeah.
distinguish that they are different.
It's cryonic. Yeah, it's cryonic. The most famous person, so there were rumors that Walt Disney was put into
Yeah.
cryonic suspension, but they do not have him there. If he is in cryonic suspension, it's there. The most famous person ever put into suspension is, do you know who Ted Williams is? He was a famous old baseball
Yeah.
player.
Yeah, I
Okay,
do.
so Ted Williams is there. And the lady told me that they often have people who will like pull up in like a pickup truck and they'll jump out with like an autographed Ted Williams baseball or baseball card and just take a selfie out in front of like the Alcor sign to show that they had like, it's their version for Ted Williams fans of visiting his grave.
Oh my god.
There is a pendant to this story about Alcor, which is really weird, and I cannot vouch for it. You can decide what you want. Do you know who Paul Allen is? He was one of the co-founders of Microsoft.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard of them before.
Okay. So Paul Allen was this excessively wealthy man who was one of the co-founders of Microsoft, and he died. He owned a property just south of there, around a place called Madera Canyon. It's about an hour and a half to the south of where Alcor is. And the rumor is that he bought that towards the end of his life. And the rumor is the reason he bought that property is he was setting up his own cryonic lab in Arizona at that property so he could be frozen and like his billionaire friends would be frozen with him and it could be serviced by Alcor. But again, I can't promise you this is true or not rumor. I do a lot of hiking and I do a lot of exploring and I've been in those canyons. So when I lived in Arizona, that's all I did was, just explore and go hiking and look for weird things. I've looked at that property from a satellite and it is weird. It doesn't look like a normal house, but you can't approach it. I know one girl who tried to go in there because she was really curious and she tried to access the property and she said a bunch of guys came out in like little golf carts with guns and chased her away.
That's
So,
so
but
outrageous.
but this is the story. Again, I can't vouch for this, but this is the story that supposedly Paul Allen bought this property to create like a billionaires boys club cryonic lab so they could have their own storage pods.
My question, I guess, with the cryonics is like, let's say you're 85 and the whole process of it is very weird because they want to freeze you as soon as possible when you die.
Yes. Well, yeah, to preserve the brain.
Yeah, and I understand that, but it's like someone from that facility kind of has to be on standby waiting. Like that happened one time. I wasn't doing anything with that, but one time I had to do an autopsy. They wanted to look at a brain of someone that had MS that died, and they wanted it like as
Yeah.
soon as she died, and I had to be
Immediately,
like
yeah.
on call to take her brain out. It's just for research it makes sense, but for this it's kind of weird. And then they perfuse your body with these certain chemicals that are supposed to preserve it so they won't like get damaged from the intense freezing and stuff.
Yeah, but they don't want, I mean, again, I'm no proponent of freezing some people, but I understand what they're trying to do with getting you in the deep freeze as soon as possible because they don't want to lose any information from the brain or have you suffer any cellular degeneration because they want, because in theory, they need to bring you back. So they need the optimal material to work. But there is one thing about this, about the cryonics that I think is really interesting now, because we are at the point where we can talk about this from a completely different context than the way it was intended. Because when it was intended, and by the way, they have there as a relic, they have the first tube of anyone who ever was put into cryonic suspension. It was a guy in California who had built his own tube and had suspended himself. And like basically he invented it. And he invented the technology and in his garage, and he had himself frozen in his garage. He like had his relatives do this. And this was the foundation of Alcor, this cryonic suspension thing. And so they later took him out of that and put him in one of their tubes, but they have that guy and they have his like primitive, Home Depot style tube, on display there as a kind of relic. But originally it was really literally intended to be, okay, you're going to die, and we're going to fix your body, we're going to grow you a new body, and we're going to put your memory in it and your brain in it, and you're going to live again. But now there is a more legitimate option, which is that, okay, maybe it's possible to take your brain and use it as a hard drive and download the information and let you live as, a cyborg, or let you live again as a computer program. And that's a discussion now that people who are into cryonics, that's a discussion they have to have with potential clients. It's like, they have to ask them on the forums. It's like, are you okay with living again virtually?
Yeah,
Or,
that is
do you
so
have
nuts.
to live? Yeah, it's a weird discussion. Well, unless you're into like simulation theory and you think the entire universe is a computer program, in which case maybe it makes perfect sense and it doesn't bother you. But that's the discussion now that people who are interested in cryonics have to have. It's like, do I need to live again in an organic body? Or am I okay living in, as an android? Or am I okay living again as a computer program? Because I still think the idea that they're just going to get you a new body and, you're going to live again as a young man with all your memories, I still think that's really far-fetched. But the idea that they might be able to tap into your brain and, upload you to a computer, that doesn't seem so far-fetched anymore to me.
No, it really doesn't. With technology and everything that the way it is, it would just be some kind of like high level AI thing or something like
Yeah.
so weird.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, but it also brings up a lot of questions, thought-provoking and disturbing ones. Again, and mostly the question about spirituality. It's like, because if you're a spiritual person, you can't go for it because you'd be denying that spirituality even exists if you're just going to live as a computer program.
I wonder too with these, like, who pays for all this? If you're 80 years old and you want to die and do this, that's fine. But you don't have like you can't have like your credit card linked up to a subscription for the monthly fee. So once you die, you have family, like you're kind of putting this burden on everybody
No.
else. Like, how's that work?
I think the way to do it, and I've never gotten into the financing, but I think the way to do it and the way I understand it is you set up kind of a trust fund.
Okay.
And so, let's say it's like you have a house and it's worth $1 million. So maybe you sell that, you take the money from the house, and instead of giving it to a relative, instead of letting a relative inherit the house, you're giving the house to the cryonic facility. And the cryonic facility, maybe they liquidate the house, they get $1 million in cash, they put it in a fund under your name, and then, the yearly income, the yearly interest from the investments winds up paying your storage fee. And then I guess if there's anything left over, when you're revived, maybe you get a check at the end,
This is nuts. This is like a rich people problem. It's just like something that would never be on my radar. All right. So earlier you were talking about that you went to Korea to see,
Yeah.
you stopped by there, and but you were over there a couple weeks ago because of Indonesia.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell everybody why you were in Indonesia?
So there's a festival in Indonesia called Menene. I should say on the island of Sulawesi in the area known as Tanah Toraja. Tanah Toraja is a separate culture on the island of Sulawesi. And you can Google this, M-A apostrophe as an accent mark, N-E-N-E is usually how it's spelled. And it's a mummy festival. And the people who live in the mountains of Toraja, they don't permanently bury their dead. When someone dies, it's a different culture, and the big thing in life in Toraja is death. Like, a funeral is way bigger than a wedding. Like, it can take years to get enough money, even for the funeral, to say goodbye to someone. The funeral's a big deal. And when someone dies, they don't bury the body and they don't cremate it. They'll nowadays, they used to use natural tannins. Nowadays, they inject it with formaldehyde to try to preserve it, and they make a mummy out of it, and they put it in family crypts. These above ground tombs. And in August, which is after the crops come in, so, the rice crops come in August, so they have time to do different things. So now they have free time, so they don't have to till the ground anymore. In August, kind of like late August, becomes the time of the dead. And so people will start thinking about what dead ancestors they want to see. And it's like, do you want to see mom this year? Yeah, let's see mom. Let's pull mom in. And so they'll take mom out and, they'll unwrap the mummy because they're in a coffin and they're wrapped up in clothing and fabric. So they'll take mom out and they'll undress her. They'll clean her off. So they'll get, little soft brushes and they'll clean all the dust off the mummy and then they'll redress her again. And so, they'll get her new clothes and they'll stand her up and everybody takes a family portrait with, the dead mother. And sometimes they'll even walk them around the villages. They'll talk to them. It's a really loving thing. From a Western perspective, it sounds like something from a bizarre horror movie, but, it's all done with love. It's, in Taraja, the dead aren't dead the way they are here. They still have some, spiritual and social role in the family. And so they'll undress the mummy, they'll clean it off, they'll redress it, they'll talk to it. Everyone will pose for a picture with it, and then they'll put it back in the coffin. And, and maybe next year they'll take out dad or something. But this happens in villages all around Taraja. I should also point out that, before the funeral, before the official goodbye, they'll just keep the mummy in the house too. So this trip, I was able to visit a home in Taraja where they have their mother or grandmother, it's a family compound, who was the oldest woman ever recorded in Taraja. She died 2 years ago at the age of 104. And so this very old lady is mummified in their house, and she's just in there in a coffin in their front room. And I was able to go over and visit. They're like, "Yeah, can you bring a package of eggs?" It's like, "Why? Are we making an omelet?" They're like, "No, it's for mom. She liked eggs. It's like a nice tribute for her." So like we brought some gifts or some eggs for the dead mother or grandmother. And we were allowed to go in there and talk to her and meet her. They've got her, in an open-faced coffin, and people will just come in and talk to her. They'll leave little notes for her. There was like a couple little notes sitting by her coffin to tell her things. And I was like, "Well, what does this note say?" And the guy's like, "Oh, it's an apology because we had to use the rest of her soap." So, but I mean, like I said, from a Western perspective, it sounds whacked out, but these people they have a great attitude about death. They're not grieving. They're not crying. They're not angry because the dead continue to have this role. People will always ask, it's like, what you're saying, there's been a dead person in their front room for 2 years. It must smell. It doesn't smell. First of all, after 2 years, she's basically like shoe leather anyway. And actually she looks really good for considering she was 104 and she's been dead for 2 years. She looks great.
It doesn't smell like, there's no smell. You don't smell like even chemical or nothing. There's just like,
no. They use formaldehyde, and whatever else they're doing, it takes away the smell. So there's no smell. It just smells a little musty. That's about it. Because this is a woman, who's just been sitting there not moving for 2 years. It's just a little bit musty in there. That's about it. The last time I was in Taraja, it's because, in the United States, this would be scandalous and it would be like front page news. It's like family keeps mummified mother in their front room for 2 years.
It actually happened sometime this year. I remember we did a story on Mother Knows Death about some guy that was living with his wife's dead body for a very long time.
Yeah, it's scandalous. And it's a sign of mental illness. And, they do intend to have a funeral for her and to put her in a tomb. It's going to take them a little while because they have to, first of all, you have to get buffaloes because you have to sacrifice a buffalo. And you have to, build the structures for the funeral. And a buffalo in Tarajan money, it's like buying a sports car, So like the whole family's going to have to agree. It's like, okay, now we have enough money. And, now we're going to do the thing. So they said maybe next year or maybe by the end of this year, they'll have the funeral for her. The last time I was in Taraja, though, they're so casual about this that I was, the last time I went to this festival, I was staying in a village, in like, a hut in a village. And I had been going around to other little villages in the area, taking pictures of the mummies and, people cleaning their relatives and redressing them. And the last day I was in this village, a girl walks in and, because I had gotten to know the family, I was staying in a family house. It's like a homestay and, eating with them and just hanging out with them. And she comes in, she's like, "Oh yeah, so you're really into this death stuff, right?" I was like, yeah, it seems like it. I mean, that's why I'm here. She's like, "Did we forget to tell you that our grandmother is dead in the hut next to you?" I was like, "No, you never mentioned that," which is just like a strange thing to forget to mention. It's like, "Would you like to meet her?" It's like, yeah, I would. Let's go meet Granny. And so we went in there, and she was just, and she looked great. She had been there for a while. They would come in, and it's really cute because they really respect these people. Like I say, being dead in Taraja isn't like being dead here. Like they'll knock on the door first and like, Grandma, we're coming in. Is that okay? We're coming in. We have a visitor for you. They'll let her know so we don't just barge in and stuff. It's very polite.
Just thinking about you going there, like, I mean, they can speak English to you. Like, how do you speak with them?
No, a lot of people there speak broken kind of pidgin English. English, you got to remember that English is the new Esperanto kind of because of with music, with
Yeah.
movies and with television. It's really hard to find a place where they can't put together a couple sentences of English. And also when I go there, I hire a driver, and I don't mean a car. It's like kind of like a dirt bike because the roads there are really muddy. I had tried to rent my own motorcycle there, and the guy watched me go down one street and flagged me down and said, "No, you don't drive a motorcycle in Taraja. You're going to get killed on these roads. You're driving with this guy." So I just pay a guy. I had a great guy on the last trip. His name was Arwen. He knew all the villages. He spoke fluent English, and so I would just ride on the back of his motorbike, and we'd go from city to city, and he'd translate everything for me.
It's really cool that they don't have a problem with foreigners coming in and watching what they're doing. Like they actually seem like they want to talk about
They
it.
like it. They like it, but they're also not burdened with it. There's not a lot of tourism in Taraja. Like I would talk to Arwen one day, and I was like, "Okay, are we going to that village?" He's like, "Yeah, but I heard from my friend who's up there that there's a lot of tourists. All the tourists are there." I was like, "Well, let's check it out anyway." And you go there, there's like 25. That's not a lot of tourists. It's not like showing up in Paris in the middle of the summer. I live in Las Vegas. It's like there are more tourists here at any time than residents. So it's not a high degree of tourism. And when you get further along, like if there were too many people at one of the villages, and like trying to take photos and trying to stick their nose into things, I would just tell Arwen, let's look for another village. And so we would just get on the motorbike and go look for another village that was doing the mummies. And always, when we got to the next village, there was nobody there. It was just me as the only outsider. So there's not a lot of tourism. They genuinely seem to appreciate the fact that we're interested in them and learning from them. Obviously, it helps if you treat them with respect. And at this point, no one's going to Taraja, I think, unless they're genuinely interested in it because, it's a long way to go and it's hard to get to. It also helps if you try to understand some of the local customs. Like, I would always bring like a big pack of cigarettes, and the cigarettes aren't for the living, they're for the dead, and I actually took some pictures, like they'd light a cigarette and shove it in one of the mummies' mouths. Just like, give them a cig. Can't hurt them now, So, we would bring cigarettes or like, there was a really touching series of photos, and it's one of the ones that I put on social media, just of this father redressing his son. His son had died young of sepsis. He's a little boy, and he had died a couple years ago. And so this was the first time the father had opened up the casket to look at the son's mummy and redress him. And so it was really very touching, like the tenderness with which he is approaching his son. And they had buried his son, like they had put some money in his hands, like some folded up bills in his hands as an offering. And the bills had become really tattered. So I walked up to the father, and this isn't even a lot of money. In American terms, it's just a couple dollars, but I pulled out some new bills. It's like, can I give you some new bills to replace those? And the father was, he was flattered. He was very flattered by it. He appreciated that, and it made things good. He's like, thank you. And so he took the money that I had given him, and he had, put it in the son's hands. So, if you show the respect, show that you understand, some of the local customs, and it helps. Obviously, it helps if you're making the offerings and stuff. No one has any problem with having you around. No one that I've met.
I think now that you're saying that, especially with the loss of a child and stuff, I don't actually think it's as weird because I think in most cases, especially if you lose any kind of loved one, it's like once they're cremated or even buried, especially when they go to a cemetery, it's kind of like an out of sight thing. And you just have memories of them and you don't really ever get to have contact with their physical body anymore. And it almost just to like hug someone might, even though it sounds crazy because they're a
It doesn't sound
mummy.
crazy because they're doing it and it works.
Yeah, I mean, it just I totally see that. And speaking of your Instagram, I did want to push people over to that.
Oh, thank you.
It's your handle is at Hexenkult, so it's HEXENKULT. And
Yeah.
I want people to go over there so they could see, because you just took pictures of all of this stuff. And
Yes.
talking about it is one thing, but actually seeing it is, because you're describing 100% of what you saw. But to see photos of people holding their dead children and parents and everything like that is just really, it's really striking.
The guy that I mentioned, there's a photo series of him with the kid on Instagram. The 104-year-old woman mummy that I mentioned, she's on there too. The thing about the guy with the kid that really touched me, that made it emotionally powerful for me, because when I got to that village, there were a bunch of people doing it, and I immediately gravitated towards the guy with the kid. I was like, I just want to sit here with this guy and understand what he's doing and be at his side as he does this, because this is the one for me. Part of it was that kid had not been prepared. He had not been prepared with chemicals. He was not in good condition. That kid's mummy was falling apart already after only 2 years. But there was no sign of revulsion on the part of the father. The father loves the kid, and that's all that matters. It doesn't matter that his skin is peeling away like a zombie from a horror movie. It doesn't matter to him because love overrides that. That was one of the things that was so powerful to me about that particular one, is specifically because the mummy wasn't in good condition and it didn't deter the father.
Yeah, it is. I really could see that, because that, I feel like that, I always think that that's one, I mean, because I have little kids and you're just like, that would just be the worst thing ever to ever, like, you always think about how do these people that lose children like live their life after that. And I think that connection might be, I mean, you couldn't do that in America for sure. No way.
But also the thing that I have to point out about this in Indonesia is that the thing that gets lost unless you're really there is the amount of humor they approach it with. Because like you start to describe this and it sounds so somber, so like this somber sacred thing, but they find it's a joyful thing. Like I said, they were lighting cigarettes and putting them in some guys' mouths, like they were putting funny hats on them and stuff. Like I remember the last time I was there, someone came and there was this mummy of his kid just sitting there in really bad shape. And the guy just stuck his finger in the mummy's eye socket, just stuck his finger in the goo and just started laughing. It's like there's an amount of humor with it that we can't, that's hard for us to fathom because the dead are so dead here.
It's really cool how we just live in this world and how things are just so vastly different from one country to another as far as how we handle death. But that, I mean, when you talk about this way, it's kind of like there's not, I think that's why everyone, especially Americans, they fear death so much because it's very final. And
because we've hidden it from them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we've hidden it from them. But I think I've always felt there are two ways to travel. You can, and this is why I go to Toronto. You can travel to see how much similar the rest of the world is to us, or you can travel to find out how different the world is from the rest of us. I don't care how similar the world is to us. I want to find out how it's different because I want to learn. And that's why I go to places like that. And there are plenty of places like that where things are just
I mean, your
different.
trips, I'm jealous of your trips.
Well, come.
I'm considering it. I would like to go like next year if I could, for real. I was telling Gabe, I was like, yo, we got to go on this trip with Paul.
Well, Gabe would love this.
Yeah, he really would. So with your book, your book's coming out soon. Here it's coming out
October 1st and September 16th in the UK.
Yeah, so you have a bunch of events and stuff coming up. Do you want to tell everybody where they can see you? You're going to do talks and stuff or just signings?
Yeah, I'm doing talks. I'm trying to set up a link tree on this. My entire month of October is basically taken up. October 2nd, Redlands, California. October 3rd, Los Angeles. October 4th, Tucson. October 5th, Las Vegas. October 6th, Phoenix. October 7th, Salt Lake City. Then I get a little bit of a respite. Well, not much. The 10th in New York. The 11th, I am coming to Philadelphia finally. Then the 16th, I'm doing it online with Mark Twain House. The 17th, Reno, Nevada. The 22nd, Whitby, England. The 23rd, in London. And then I come back the 26th at the Huntington Library in Pasadena, California, and the 27th in Pomona, California.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Nicole.
I want to mention too that people can pre-order your book, and they should, because they could go right on Amazon and do it. It's real easy right there.
Yes.
And we'll put the links to all
Sure.
of that in our newsletter and on our Instagram and stuff.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you for listening to Mother Knows Death. As a reminder, my training is as a pathologist assistant. I have a master's level education and specialize in anatomy and pathology education. I am not a doctor, and I have not diagnosed or treated anyone, dead or alive, without the assistance of a licensed medical doctor. This show, my website, and social media accounts are designed to educate and inform people based on my experience working in pathology so they can make healthier decisions regarding their life and well-being. Always remember that science is changing every day, and the opinions expressed in this episode are based on my knowledge of those subjects at the time of publication. If you are having a medical problem, have a medical question, or are having a medical emergency, please contact your physician or visit an urgent care center, emergency room, or hospital. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Mother Knows Death on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you get podcasts. Thanks.